A surprising Texans trade update, as this player could be traded sooner rather than later. The Texans wide receiving core pretty stacked ever since the NFL draft, and a lot of analysts giving updates on the fact that this guy is playing really well in OTAs, so there could be some value here. I disagree. We've been talking about this trade for a while, and I feel like it's never going to happen. They're just going to keep him as depth. And realistically, it doesn't make too much sense to me why they would trade him for no value whatsoever, considering most teams aren't going to get that much value out of John Metchie. But if you're new to the channel, 77% of you are not subscribed. Love and appreciate all the support you guys have been given for Texans Digest. If you want to see more, just hit that sub button. But Mr. John Metchie has been rumors that he's going to be on the trade block, and maybe now that the Texans have this loaded receiving core with Nico Collins, Jaden Higgins, Christian Kirk, Jalen Noel, and then Justin Watson, Braxton Berrios, you might get some potential out of a 24-year-old John Metchie. But the problem is teams aren't going to want to pay more than a 7th, a 6th, I think a 5th at max, and that's saying a lot considering he didn't have the best season last year when he was on the field. However, I talk about how he's been doing good in OTAs. I mean, he's been a great route runner, and honestly, wasn't the slot receiver that we thought he could be, especially when Tank Dell got hurt last year. But let me play the clip and let you guys be the judge. So Mr. John Metchie catching a pass over the middle. Beautiful throw from Davis Mills, but you could see the work. That was posted on the Texans Instagram story, and you could just see how in rhythm he is, and that's the player that they kind of want him to be, right? Over the middle, and this hasn't been the first time either, right? You look at Metchie and his route running abilities, he's really good. Absolutely torched the cornerback on that one. But I mean, looking at John Metchie, I mean, there really are a lot of positive traits that you can get from this receiver, and if he can get hyped up for a 4th or even a 3rd round pick, I think a 4th, Caserio might think about it, because he's really just depth to this team. But you don't want to just trade away a 24-year-old, right? I mean, this is a team that you might need him in the long run, but it really is a tough call considering they have veterans, right? They have Braxton Berrios to step up, and I think Metchie could be a longer plan. And the problem is he's not really going to play, right? Jalen Noel is the future for the slot. He's a shifty guy in the middle, and then you look at the fact that you have Tank Dell who's coming back. So this is a lot to think about for the Texans, and John Metchie is great. I think I have a sudden bias just because I love him as a person. I love him as a player, even though he wasn't the best player last year when he could have stepped up. But, I mean, the biggest thing is I don't see why the Texans need to get rid of him. So if they were likely to deal anyone, it would probably be because they can't fit the 53-man roster. Metchie would just be somebody who they could get some value for, maybe a 6th round pick. It's like he was a former 2nd round pick. He did not play the start of that season with the diagnosis, and then he returned the following year, and then he's never been on the field for more than half of the Texans' offensive snaps. So this is really saying, in terms of Bleacher Report's Gary Davenport, they're basically saying if he's given the right opportunity, maybe he will shine. But even when the Texans gave him an opportunity last year, he didn't make the most of it. He dropped a few passes, and I'm not going to say anyone's perfect, but he fumbled in a very huge Chargers playoff game, and that was, again, kind of the icing on the cake for, hey, we got to get some more depth at wide receiver in the draft, and I love that the Texans did that, and now that the offensive line is looking better, I don't really feel the need to mention John Metchie in a trade. It could just be me. I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of what do the Texans do, right? There's really no value in trading John Metchie. He's 24 years old. The only thing is he could be, quote-unquote, frustrated and demand a trade, that's where you could just, get him off the roster. But I don't think that's Metchie's character. He knows he needs to step up. He knows he needs to prove himself, and that's what we saw at OTAs and a bunch of clips there. So I love the fact that Metchie is continuing to get better, continuing to put his head down, continuing to work. But the problem is, are there going to be any suitors? Are there going to be the biggest potential trade candidate to watch? It really isn't that big, right? I don't know what teams are even interested, right? There's really not a lot of teams that I believe are that interested in John Metchie. Maybe the Giants, but they kind of have a bunch of weird receivers of Metchie's kind of scheme in terms of how he's a good route runner, very shifty, and that was what the Texans hoped for, was Metchie to be that long play guy, similar to Jameson Williams on the Lions. I mean, those two at college, they were incredible together. So Metchie, again, has not lived it up. And I don't think the Texans should trade him. I really don't believe there's a reason to. And I don't care if you think you have so many wide receivers. You can never have enough at this stake, especially last year when Nico Collins went down, Stephon Diggs went down, Tank Dell went down. All three of your starting receivers were hurt at one point during last season. Maybe not all together, but if they were all hurt altogether, worst case scenario, you now have, in terms of last year, you need Metchie to step up and be the one. You need Robert Woods to step up and be the one. Xavier Hutchinson. All those three guys didn't make much of a difference in terms of, obviously they're not Nico Collins, but looking at this year, right? Let's say hypothetically, worst case scenario happens last year, all three of your starters, bang, 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 okay? You now need Jalen Noel, a rookie, to step up. Justin Watson, not rookie, but a veteran to step up. Braxton Berrios to step up. And now you have Metchie for depth, right? So I think, if anything, the Texans kind of just keep their receivers. I'm pretty sure Metchie will be somebody that's just on the bench as depth. It's between him and Hutchinson as potential players to be maybe moved to the practice squad. I think both of them can make the team slightly, but it's going to be close because you look at this depth chart, there's a lot of depth at different positions. Running back, you got 4 studs. Wide receiver, you got a bunch of studs. Tight end, there's a lot of players in the tight end room, and there's a possibility they can keep all those players and then, manage what you're going to do with the defensive line and linebackers or anything of that nature. But this is a tough situation to be in. I don't believe you just say, oh, this is a big trade candidate, because he hasn't really done anything. Yes, he's young, but that's because when you look at the value of Metchie, you're not trading for the player that I guess you are trading for the player that you think he can be, but you're also trading for the potential, right? I guess that's the same thing. But when you look at John Metchie, you're not going to give up a lot because you're hoping that he can be, you know what I'm saying? So, again, I don't think the Texans move on just because if somebody really does want Metchie, they're just going to be like, hey, would you take a 7th for John Metchie? And I just don't think teams are interested. So I'm done talking about this. I'm done with the trade buzz. I'm done with John Metchie this, John Metchie that. Love him. He's going to stay on the team. I don't believe he's going to get traded. So all these articles like here saying, oh, John Metchie's this big trade candidate. No, he's not. He really isn't. Because what has he done? What has he proven? What has he been on the field for? Yes, if you want to trade for the fact that he hasn't been on the field and you think he can be that, go right for it. But I think there's a reason why he is getting less and less snaps. Now, all goes well for Metchie. Hopefully, he can be a great player for this team. But again, he can't get any playing time in terms of not getting enough chances to showcase his talent because he's not going to be on the field for many snaps this season, especially considering he's probably wide receiver 6, maybe wide receiver 5. So, you have Watson ahead of him. You have Berrios ahead of him. You have probably Noel, Higgins, all those guys ahead of him. So, again, that's where if you're a team, do you take the risk and trade for Met? I don't think anybody's going to want to really do that unless they give up, again, like I said, a low-round pick. So, this is a crazy situation for the Texans, but you're looking at it, maybe it's time with the Texans call. I just don't. I think it's a good idea for other teams like the Bills, like all these other teams. But for the Texans, it really doesn't make a difference to get an extra 7th-round pick in next year's draft for a guy who's 24 who you can have his depth on the roster. And unless, worst case scenario, he wants out of Houston. But, I mean, I love what C.J. Gardner-Johnson's calling him. So, in OTAs, CJ and Metchie have had a little chemistry. He said, that's Metch 8 or Coop. And I just thought it was funny because it's funny to think that I don't know. It was just funny. So C.J. Gardner-Johnson I love him as a character. That he is just a class guy. He's really funny. But him and Metchie have been going back and forth in terms of just that's my guy Metch or 8, nothing else. It's just funny. So something I thought was funny on X. But thank you guys so much for watching. John Metchie, potential trade rumors, more and more articles saying John Metchie's he's not getting traded. But let me know what you think in the comments. And hit that sub button if you're new to stay up to date with all Texans news. This has been Mike Zanetti, Texans Digest. We'll catch you in the next video.